Well, Subnautica 2 is finally here. The early access version, that is. It had 5 million wishlists on Steam, which is not surprising given how popular the first game was. Those are some pretty high expectations to have to live up to, and the first sequel, or standalone expansion, Below Zero, didn't exactly instill a lot of confidence. Not in me at least. But hey, what are mistakes if not opportunities to learn? If they manage to correct those and reinforce what did work, Subnautica 2 will become the best survival game ever. Then the whole publisher scandal happened. I've explained the situation somewhat thoroughly in my previous video, but to summarize, the publisher, Krafton, promised a large performance-based bonus to the developer, Unknown Worlds. But then they got cold feet, and the actual CEO of the company used actual ChatGPT to try to weasel out of it. Try being the operative word here, because while they did fire the entire leadership of the company, they had to reinstate them after losing a wrongful termination suit. I'm still baffled by this whole affair. ChatGPT, guys. ChatGPT! You can't make this up. After all this, I was slightly concerned about the state of the game, and what this little intermission would do to the development process. But according to the game's director, Charlie Cleveland, the game has been ready for early access ever since 2025, so enough stalling, let's see if that statement holds up. Welcome back to Planet 4546b. Excuse me, welcome to the desert planet Zezura.
You are not on Zezura.
Wait, no, that's not right either. Where are we? We are once again stranded on another, coincidentally, ocean planet. Right off the bat, the presentation of this game is awesome. There's so much detail in this environment that my eyes can't help but wonder. They picked a really unique color scheme for this first area, vibrant shades of coral and sea green, and the way it all fades into the deep blue of the ocean. And when the twin suns go down, all the bioluminescent plants and creatures light up. Gold, turquoise and lavender. Come on, when am I getting another opportunity to say lavender in a video? The improved lighting effects really steal the show here. The rays of sunlight seeping in through the cracks, the glare coming off of these bright surfaces, the reflections. Subnautica 2 is just as much of a vibe game as its predecessor. Sometimes you just want to jump in and feast your eyes on the alien nature while listening to the sounds of the ocean and its inhabitants. The gameplay will be very familiar to those who play Subnautica, although with some much needed quality of life improvements. Most importantly, fabricators and base builders will now use resources from nearby containers, so you don't have to constantly juggle them in and out of your inventory. Base building options have been expanded a lot too, so you can come up with way more elaborate structures than you could before, and it's more convenient too. By the way, containers include more than just lockers. Vehicle inventory and floating crates also count, so moving and establishing new bases is also much less of a hassle. Especially if you have a co-op partner to work with. One of you does the logistics, the other the construction. Because yes, there is co-op in this game. This would have been one of my first suggestions for the sequel, but they kinda beat me to the punch. Now, you might think that this ruins the horror and feeling of solitude the first game has, and I'm here to tell you, you are correct. The way I see it, you have a choice. In single player, you get to soak in the ambience and experience the game's world at your own speed. And in multiplayer, you get to play with someone else. You get to share responsibilities, explore with twice the inventory, and come up with base layouts together. The trade-off is that your immersion will sometimes be broken by the janky third-person animations. Which one of these sounds more appealing to you? Because either way, the other one is completely optional. On a technical side, the game is not as unstable as I thought it would be. In fact, out of all three games, this one probably has the smoothest early access experience, which unfortunately isn't high praise but is praise nonetheless. For reference, I played the game set to medium graphics with this setup and the game ran fine. Ultra settings were out of the question, and based on how badly my PC handled it, I do wonder what kind of rig they expect you to have. Anyway, I'm happy with how the game looks on medium, besides some of the lighting effects. The lights can appear very grainy under certain conditions, more than what I'd come to expect from Unreal Engine. Distant walls of bases can look incredibly ugly, for example. And I'm not sure the night sky is supposed to look like this either. Also, don't you think the bases look a little dark by default? Now shield your eyes, because I'm about to install a light. You know, for how expensive these lamps are and how much power they draw, I'd expect them to be just a little bit brighter than a jar of fireflies. I haven't run into any major game-breaking bugs yet. The game did kick us out to the main menu on one occasion, but blessedly they've implemented an autosave system, so it was no real hindrance. A couple of minor glitches I've seen are items spawning in awkward positions, creatures going stop motion, and the infamous desaturation bug. Now I understand that the effect itself is deliberate, but don't you think the shift is a bit too drastic? In fact, a lot of the atmospheric fog looks funky. This was already an issue in Below Zero. I don't get why they're getting worse when they got it right in the first game. Well, the horrible popping is gone at least. Sometimes there is a mismatch between the subtitles and spoken dialogue, which is understandable, rewrites do happen, but the base computer subtitles are always wrong. It just repeats the last subtitle over and over.
Welcome aboard.
So don't expect a perfectly polished. What's this guy doing here? This is our own private domicile and we will not be harassed. Not budging, huh? Well, let's see how you handle your atoms being sonically resonated. What? So, should you buy the game? One thing to keep in mind is that this is still the early access version, meaning the game, and most importantly, the world isn't complete. There is a lot of content here, but we also ran into the red wall sooner than I'd expected. You can cross it if you want to, but there's nothing on the other side. What was that? Correction, there is something on the other side. The red wall is a little awkwardly placed too. There is only one direction to explore from the starting zone. Whether that's a deal breaker is completely up to you. If you're someone who wants to finish the whole game in one big breath, you may want to hold off and wait until they finish and polish the game up. If on the other hand you're fine picking it up again later, or discovering the game as it's being developed, go for it. Although there is another perspective you may be considering, and that has to do with the whole publisher situation. I've seen a fair bit of concern and confusion online about this, especially now that Krafton is no longer listed as the publisher on the Steam store page. So from what I've gathered, despite what the store page says, Krafton is still the publisher and distributor of Subnautica 2, and they do get a share of the profits. Understandably, some people are reluctant to support the game if that means funding Edward Diego and his AI-first ambitions. But especially with the bonus back in play, it looks like Unknown Worlds is actually getting the better end of the deal. So if supporting the devs is a consideration for you, I'd say get yourself a copy. And what about all that AI-first stuff Krafton was touting? Does that only extend to ChatGPT making high-level management decisions, or is there AI-generated content in the game? Well, between your PDA, the NOAA, your base and vehicle computers, you sure hear a lot of AI dialogue, but besides that, I haven't really seen anything. I've inspected the usual suspects, the in-game posters, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. So I wouldn't worry about that either. In conclusion, if you're a fan of the original Subnautica, or survival games in general, Subnautica 2 is a safe bet. But don't feel pressured into buying it now if the full experience is what you're looking for. Again, a lot of the unfinished zones are right next to the starting biome, so that kind of hampers the whole open world feel. What we have so far is solid, I like the direction the game is headed, and I'm confident now that the finished product will be great. This is about as much as I can say without spoilers. I'd like to dive a little deeper and also show some later areas, so if you don't want those spoiled, then this is where we part ways. You've been warned. Now then, I just replayed the two previous games in preparation so we could compare. Subnautica's atmosphere is spectacular and is really what makes it stick out among survival games, but I was kind of underwhelmed by Below Zero. It had some good individual areas, but also some really barren ones, and as a whole I felt it lacked variety. Subnautica 2's first area was a very pleasant surprise, not only with its unique ecosystem and color palette, but all the different landmarks and sub-areas it has. These do a lot to alleviate monotony and also help you orient yourself better in a game that has no in-game map. I think this is an improvement even over the first game, where areas within the same biome could feel a bit samey. It also blurs the borders between zones, which helps them feel a little less like video game levels. The other biomes you can explore currently are not quite as vibrant as the first one, as is tradition, but even these rocky areas are well conceptualized and executed. And you do get more inspired areas too, like this alien megastructure. The sense of scale is communicated excellently. If they can keep this creativity up for the whole map, we're in for a treat. Now, the visuals are one thing. The other element that makes Subnautica's atmosphere what it is the audio and music. As you may know, the sound designer and composer of the first game was let go from the company, and in my previous video, I made no secret of preferring his work to Below Zero's audio team. For me, the sound design of Subnautica 2 is not quite up there with the first one either. I think there are a lot of cool individual noises, like the squeals of these flying jellyfish, but the ocean overall just feels much more quiet this time around, even in the livelier areas. I wonder what the reason for that is. I mean, clearly this team is capable of delivering interesting sounds, I just like to hear more of it. And please, enough of the rumbles and roars. The name of the game here is variety. As for the music, I loved Simon Chylinski's soundtrack for the original game, and I still consider it the heart of Subnautica. And as much as I enjoy Ben Prunty's music usually, the Below Zero soundtrack just doesn't hit the same. But I thought it over, listened to all three soundtracks a couple of times, both in-game and isolated, and arrived at this conclusion. The quiet, ambient parts of Simon Chylinski's music are unbeatable. The way it can subtly fade in and out like it's part of the background audio. transcendent. However, Ben Prunty really shines when the beat drops. It's dynamic, exciting and interesting, just like his other music. It wouldn't be a Ben Prunty soundtrack without the high-pitched melodic chimes. I'm also glad he brought the guitar along from the Into the Breach soundtrack. I do wish he toned it down on the synths a little. You know what, it's growing on me. This is all very subjective of course, but I think at least the shift in atmosphere from Subnautica to Below Zero was universally felt. I attribute it in large part to the music changes. Okay, enough about all this esoteric stuff. What about the actual meat of the game, the gameplay? Well, I never felt like there was much of an emphasis on the gameplay in this series. Sure, the movement is fluid, the exploration is engaging, and the vehicles are fun, but otherwise, Subnautica is pretty light on game mechanics. You gather materials and blueprints while avoiding hazards, often in the form of predators. Subnautica 2 keeps to this formula pretty closely, with a few added features for good measure, like biomods and genetic adaptations. The most significant change, however, is the new setting, with all new unfamiliar biomes and creatures. One of few strengths of Below Zero was actually its creature design, even outdoing the first game in it at some point. The sequel, fortunately, keeps this trend up. The variety of megafauna stuck out to me in particular, with newcomers like the flying jellyfish and the giant clam. I also like how many animals have the potential to hurt you, like the hammerhead and the four-eye, but will hold off as long as you respect their personal space. With predatory fish, however, it's a bit of a different story. These guys are relentless, and some of them come in veritable shoals. So just ice them. Give them the Trotsky treatment. Run them over. Well, that doesn't work anymore. Animals are now unkillable, which is an intentional and controversial choice by the developers. I'm not really in favor of this change because it makes the world feel less interactive and consequently less real. Thinking back, I didn't go out of my way to kill predators in the previous games either, but it was nice to have the option to chase them off in case you needed to be left alone. No such luck here. These guys barely even react to getting hit. We put our first base near a group of... I'm not saying that. Anyway, sure enough, these guys were quick to harass us every time we left the house.
Douchebags.
According to the devs, that's our own fault for daring to build near predators. Fine, whatever, let's just move then. Look at this area, no enemies nearby. Until we build our vehicles, that is, which draws in hammerheads like moths to a flame. So may I ask exactly where we were expected to build? Is there maybe an ecological dead zone equivalent?
Warning, entering ecological death.
I don't really get this aversion to violence. So it's fine for these guys to chomp on me to their heart's content, but when I fight back suddenly I'm the monster? Okay, fine, but then give me other ways to counter them. I meant something that was intended, and no, I'm not carrying 5 flares in my limited inventory. Oh yeah, if you thought the inventory was small in the first game, check this out. But we actually have good news on that front. Both the inventory and the quick slots are now expandable. I'd argue that quick slots are more of a quality of life change and shouldn't be tied to an unlock, but then again, in this game a quick slot is also an inventory slot, unlike in Subnautica 1. Overall it's a fine system. We already get a lot more quality of life than we had in the first game. The ability to use resources from nearby containers being the most impactful, especially for those who like to mess around with base building more. All I need now is an auto deposit feature and my life will be complete. One of the more baffling changes was to the beacon. I thought it was a perfectly functional mechanic before. You craft it as a deployable and place it wherever you want. In Subnautica 2 it costs the same amount of resources, but now it's built with the Habitat Builder. Well, so what? Just build it and stash it for later. That's a neat idea, except you can't. Just like with the floating crate, you have to actively hold it to carry it, which means no wavemaker, no vehicle. Of course you could always attach it to the hardpoints on your vehicle. Yeah, you know, the hardpoints. You do realize there are hardpoints on your vehicles where you can attach tools and deployables, right? Right over there. Okay, seriously, if you didn't know, I don't blame you. I think they could have done a better job of explaining this mechanic, rather than mention it once in passing at the beginning of the game when you have no vehicles anyway and trust you to remember and connect the dots. I mean, it turns the floating crates from a fairly useless mechanic into your vehicle's inventory. I could have used a heads up is all I'm saying. By default, the tadpole has one hardpoint, and to bring it back to the beacons, I'm not using it for that. Even just putting the resources needed for the beacon inside the crate is more space efficient. And what's the point of the beacon being movable anyway? I usually just set it and forget it. Not a fan of this change. And as for the vehicles, hardpoints are not the only thing I found a bit confusing. So seemingly the devs are dead set on the whole modular vehicle thing, though it is a bit more intuitive this time around. You have your main vehicle, the tadpole, that you can attach a chassis to. The scout chassis makes it faster, the hall chassis has more trunk volume, and I assume more specialized ones are coming later. You can freely detach and swap them based on what the situation requires, but I feel a bit uncomfortable just leaving my chassis floating around, exposed to the elements. Or rather, the hammerheads and glitchy physics. I think a good solution could be being able to store chassis in the vehicle base, so when you undock your vehicle, you could choose whether to keep the chassis or detach from it and leave it docked. But if they don't want to do all that, could we at least get a marker on the chassis? I think they sort of got started on it. See, it's a set label when you mouse over it. Synthetic, huh? Isn't that what I put on one of the lockers? So why is it showing up here? And the chassis actually do get a marker, as long as they're on the vehicle. You know, which already has one. Something got really mixed up here. I won't insult the devs' intelligence by suggesting vehicle customization, the previous games had it after all, but it's sorely needed here too, especially in multiplayer. Otherwise my ride's gonna keep getting stolen. Speaking of multiplayer, it's been said before but I'll say it here too. There needs to be an indicator that shows if someone's tagging along on your vehicle. That's arguably more important than indicating if someone is in a vehicle, which does have an indicator. Other than that, I think this new vehicle system has potential, especially in multiplayer where each of you might want to specialize your vehicles. I'd still like to see a dedicated Cyclops-sized vehicle too. I mean, holding on to each other's rides is cool, but it'd be fun to actually be able to do something while being driven around. The only thing you can do now is switch to a different camera in the hall seat. I don't really see what utility that... Fans of Subnautica and detractors of Below Zero will be happy to know that they ditched the whole voice protagonist direct storytelling angle. I'm not going to gloat, I'll just say I think they made the right decision. It wasn't really working out, so why force it? The story, or mission structure, is virtually identical to the first game. At certain points, your AI overlord will give you a point of interest to go to push you into exploring the deeper areas. Right now in early access, because of the layout of the map, pretty much all the objectives are in the same direction, just a little bit further each time. Which admittedly is pretty funny. I mean, come on Noah, I could have gotten all that in one trip. But it is something that will hopefully change as the map gets expanded in all directions. And that's where things are currently. The game is already massively successful, so I don't think the devs are hurting for feedback, but I think what will make or break the game in the long run is whether the devs can keep delivering content at a reasonable pace. That and how they respond to the feedback they get. The aggressive creatures seem to be a sore spot for a lot of players, and the devs already promised to address it, which I think is a good sign. To bring it back to the question I raised at the beginning, was the game ready for early access? Well, given how much it was delayed, publisher interference or not, I feel like this release is a little light on content. The roadmap isn't exactly informative either, I mean the future. I assume that's somewhere between now and Judgment Day. How much value you get out of the game now depends a lot on how much tolerance you have for repetition and how much time you like to spend on base building. So don't feel pressured to buy the game because of FOMO. Also, this isn't exactly relevant right now, but I do wonder if they're planning some sort of DLC for later, a la Below Zero. If they do, what I'd recommend is to expand the main game somehow, instead of making it a standalone expansion. Even if it's a separate map, just make it a place you can take your own character to, instead of a full reset. At this point, with 3 Subnautica games, I just don't think that would be as exciting. And anyway, finish this one first. I mean, it's such a beautiful game, it deserves a worthy ending. Right? I don't know, what do you think? I was actually kind of impressed by the behavior of the aggressive creatures, despite how annoying they were. Like how the mangoes will circle around you, or how the marrow breach will lock onto you from a distance. It makes them feel a lot more like real creatures and not, you know, like World of Warcraft NPCs. I also kinda like the first Leviathan encounter, or rather the level design around it. You know, how you can hide under the rocks and evade it? It makes it feel more like an intentional encounter, rather than the stop signs that the Reaper Leviathans effectively were. Anyway, I could talk about this game for an hour, but I'll leave that for the full release. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.